Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests, and welcome to the representatives of the World Bank Group, representatives of North Sumatra's provincial government, West Java's provincial government, the Ministry of Transportation of the Republic of Indonesia, Indonesian State-Owned Electricity Company, or PLN, and also the representatives of other related ministries. Hello, my name is Sarah Wayne, and it is an honor for me to be the Master of Ceremony for today's event and workshop. Ladies and gentlemen, the government of Indonesia has been promoting the adoption of an e-mobility program for a sustainable and clean transportation system, and also the adoption of the e-mobility program or road transport in Indonesia, which is expected to be able to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by reducing the country's reliance on fossil fuels and also enabling Indonesia to maximize the use of its abundant nickel reserve, which Indonesia has the largest nickel reserve in the world, which is also a key raw material in making lithium-ion batteries. Several policies and also action plans have also been issued by the government of Indonesia to accelerate the e-mobility program. And public transit electrification is just one of the priorities of the Indonesian government to be able to accelerate the e-mobility adoption in the country. However, ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, the steep upfront cost of the battery of the electric bus technology is holding back many cities to adopt the system. Market readiness and also the charging infrastructure provision are also essential issues to be considered to be able to adopt the sustainable transport system in a certain city. And to support the implementation of a sustainable and also clean transport system in Indonesia, currently the World Bank, with funding from the Mobility and Logistics Trust Fund and the Energy Sector Management Assistance Program, has embarked on a technical assistance on e-mobility adoption roadmap for the Indonesian Mass Transit Program. And as part of the preparation of the World Bank funded Indonesia Mass Transit Program support project in the urban areas of Greater Bandung and Greater Medan is also through capacity building and also knowledge exchange actions to raise awareness of the benefits of adopting e-mobility, in particular for the mass transit systems in Greater Bandung and Greater Medan. And today we'll be having a workshop, and in the series of workshops, there will be presentations on best practices from other countries on the use of e-mobility and mass transit systems. And we'll also be addressing the e-mobility policy gaps in Indonesia, and also we'll be discussing the implementation strategies and business models to be able to adopt e-mobility and mass transit systems in the selected cities. And as for today, in the third workshop, we'll be discussing and validate the proposed roadmap for electrification of the proposed bus rapid transit systems in Greater Bandung and also Greater Medan. And before we start, please do allow me to explain to you first regarding the house rules for today's event. Please click join audio, and please note to mute your microphone or turn your microphone off, and also video if you are not speaking. We'd like to also advise you to join us from a stable internet connection for a clear Zoom experience. And while you are speaking, please make sure there are no background noise and avoid accessing the workshop nearby other users because it may cause an echo or feedback issues. And if you have any questions, please do write the questions directly in the chat box feature available. And I would like to also remind you that for the presentations and the workshop today will be delivered both in English and Bahasa Indonesia. Therefore, we'd like to also inform you, we do have an interpretation feature available for your use. If you are joining us through a computer or laptop, I would like to also inform you on how you can use the interpretation feature, which is you can access it by clicking the interpretation icon, which is located on the bottom right of your computer or your laptop screen. If you like to choose English or Indonesian, there are two choices. Please do click which language of your choice. And remember, you do not need to change the channel when speaking. And don't you worry, because the speaker and also interpreter will be able to hear your voice. And if you are accessing the workshop from a mobile phone, you may find the option on the more icon, which is selected on the right corner of your screen. Please do choose the language of your choice, which is Bahasa or English. And also remember to choose to mute the original audio and done after selecting the selected language of your choice. And ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to also note that to ensure the smooth running of the workshop, the host or co-host of the webinar reserves the right to force mute the audio of participants who are not speaking that may be unintentionally causing disruption to the said workshop. And this is to ensure that the audio of the speaker and also interpreter remains clear at all times. And we thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your understanding and also cooperation in this matter. And ladies and gentlemen, before we start today's agenda, I would like to give an overview of what we'll be discussing and what we'll be presenting today. The e-mobility adoption roadmap for Greater Bandung and Greater Medan Bus Rapid Transit Systems workshop will be divided into a few sessions, as you can see here on your screen. The first will be welcoming remarks, followed by an opening session. And then afterwards, we'll be continuing the agenda with presentations and also a discussion panel. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to encourage your active participation through the Zoom chat box to give your support and also opinion regarding the presentations and also topics discussed. And to start our agenda and our workshop this morning, without further ado, please join me in welcoming and inviting Bapak Suharto, the Director of Road Transportation, from the Director General of Land Transportation, the Ministry of Transportation of Indonesia, to deliver his welcoming remarks and also start our workshop this morning.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning. May peace be upon us all. Honorable representatives from the World Bank and also all leaders from ministries, institution, from the Coordinating Ministry of Maritime and Investment Affairs, Ministry of Industry, Ministry of ESDM, Ministry of Home Affairs, and also Ministry of Environment and Forestry, and from Bappenas, from Financial Services Authority, and also from the head of Office of Transportation of West Java and North Sumatra, and also distinguished guests and participants who are present in this event today. Let us pray to the God Almighty for His blessing, allowing us and permitting us to be present in this event, even though it is conducted virtually. As the Director of the Road Transportation, in this occasion, I am representing Mr. Director General of Land Transportation, who cannot attend this event. I'd like to send my high gratitude to the World Bank for their support that have been provided by Indonesia. The facilitation provided to develop the infrastructure in the process of electrification of bus in Indonesia. It is an honor indeed for us for the assistance provided by the World Bank through the funding from Polo and from ESMAC. Therefore, we can gather in today's agenda to conduct technical assistance workshop about the electrification of the land transportation. This has also become the series of the workshop, and hope this event will be able to add our knowledge and our understanding in the effort to improve our preparedness in adopting electric vehicle for mass transportation in Indonesia. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as we all know that in Indonesia, we have about 515 cities consisting of provincial cities, including some urban area, which experience some transportation problems, especially about traffic jam that is relatively high. And this has caused the lack of quality of life of the community due to the wasting of time, and there is also economic disadvantage due to the expenditure of the fossil fuel. Electrical bus as the mass transportation can provide the high benefit in order to deal with the pollution problem and also to stress on the climate change. And the roadmap implementation through e-mobility for the mass transportation program in Indonesia that has been initiated together with the World Bank for pilot cities in Indonesia, including Bandung and Medan. And of course, this becomes our full attention from the Ministry of Transportation through the Directorate General of Land Transportation. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, that's all my speech in this very good occasion. And I would like to say thank you. I would like to say thank for all the parties, especially from the World Bank, who has given the e-mobility assessment. Hope the workshop and also the result of the workshop will run smoothly, and it can provide contribution and inputs to the policy that should be taken for the next steps. Hope Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala gives his blessing to us. That's all from me. Thank you very much. And Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon us all. Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Mr. Suharto, for your welcoming remarks.
The East Asia and Pacific, the World Bank, please join me in kindly inviting Mr. Ben Ibergen, the Practice Manager Transport of East Asia and Pacific, the World Bank, to deliver his opening remarks. Without further ado, Mr. Ibergen, the screen and time is yours.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you very much, Director Suharto, DG, Director General of Land Transportation. Very much, thank you very much. I would like to thank the government of Indonesia first and foremost for facilitating this workshop and for hosting this. It's a very important kind of exercise, and we're very, very honored to be part of this. Let me say a few words and then let the workshop go on. And thank you again. A few words on the issue of decarbonization, mobilization, urbanization, and all the issues that comes with it. And first and foremost, on global warming, of course. Global warming and associated risks to climate change have become a worldwide priority with growing focus on climate mitigation efforts. Indonesia's GHG emissions, excluding land use, have increased by 157% between 1990 and 2018. The country has become one of the world's largest polluters and is the world's 5th largest emitter of GHG. The largest driver of overall GHG emission are CO2 emissions from fuel combustion. The transport sector, still strongly dominated by fossil fuels, is the 2nd largest contributor, accounting for 27% of the national CO2 emissions. Only after the energy, the power sector, which accounts for 35% of the national CO2 emissions. So the global and the local emissions are further aggravated by the rapidly growing number of private cars and motorcycles in Indonesia and limited availability of mass transit options. The high growth rate in personal motor vehicle fleet is mainly due to the rapid urbanization process and unreliable public transport services provided. Today, over half of the population lives in cities. Half of the population lives in cities. By 2045, nearly 3/4 will live in cities. Rapid urbanization is increasing the importance of cities as a living space for people and as economic hubs. Much of the growth in Indonesia's urban population has been in urban areas remote from centers of employment and commerce. From the 20 million jobs created between 2001 and 2011, 18 million were in urban areas. Residents need motorized transport to reach jobs, education, and social activities, and the coverage and quality of public transport provided does not offer a credible alternative to motorcycles and cars so far. This has resulted in unsustainable growth in car and motorcycle ownership, 8.5% and 10.5% per annum respectively from 2007 to 2017, and consequently a very high level of motorization and corresponding congestion. Furthermore, high levels of motorization are leading to serious air quality issues. In 2019, Jakarta overtook Beijing for the first time as among the world's most PM 2.5 polluted capital cities. So Indonesia recognizes the need to contribute to global GHG mitigation effort. In 2021, Indonesia launched a long-term strategy for low carbon and climate resilience 2050 to support the country's transition toward low carbon economy and green post-COVID-19 recovery. This 2050 program, the LTS-LCCR 2050, was designed considering the need to balance between emissions reduction, economic growth, justice or fairness, and climate resilient development. While the country has set remarkable targets for GHG emissions reduction, recent studies suggest that more ambitious targets may be needed. Under the nationally determined contributions, the NDC, to the Paris Agreement, Indonesia pledged to reduce its emission by 29% from the business as usual scenario in 2030, or 41% with international support. However, this unconditional NDC target would increase emissions to 535% above the 1990 levels. To keep below the 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature limit, Indonesia's 2030 emissions would need to be around 461 metric tons carbon dioxide equivalent, or 61% above 1990 levels. This creates a gap of 1,168 metric ton CO2 equivalent. To partially address this, LTS-LCCR 2050 targeted achieving the national GHG emissions peak and net sink in forestry and land use in 2030, and rapidly progress towards net zero emission in 2060. The reorientation towards public transport and adaptation of e-mobility could contribute to decarbonize the transport sector and achieve greener transport outputs in Indonesia. To reduce emissions generated by the transport sector, Indonesia needs to shift towards 1. Sustainable urban mobility solutions such as public transport, walking and cycling, and 2. Electric vehicles, the EVs. Together, these two strategic shifts in the country mobility agenda could reap significant gains in addressing the rapid growth in GHG emissions. The government of Indonesia is currently preparing the Indonesian Mass Transit Project with the World Bank, Mass Tran, to support the rollout of the ambitious Indonesian Mass Transit Program starting with Greater Bandung and Greater Medan. Mass Tran will support the government of Indonesia's efforts to accord priority to mass transit, address the technical and financial constraints at subnational level, and catalyze the development of such sustainable systems in Indonesian cities. This $364 million operation is being prepared and will be jointly co-financed by the World Bank and the AFD, the French agents, the Agence Française de Développement. World Bank board approval is expected during the second semester of FY22. Its project development objective is to improve urban mobility and accessibility on high priority corridors in selected urban areas of Indonesia and strengthen institutional capacity for mass transit development. Mass-Tran is proposed as a combination of mutually reinforcing investments and institutional strengthening activities to support the rollout of the Indonesian Mass Transit Program. In August 2019, the Indonesian Presidential Regulation, Perpres number 55 of 2019, was issued to enact the EV National Program for Road Transport. While in 2020, the share of EVs in vehicle sales was 0.15%, the government of Indonesia expects that EVs will make up at least 20% of total domestic sales by 2025. The Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources developed a roadmap of EV adoption, addressing both EVs and charging stations, which includes reaching 2,350 e-buses by 2025. E-mobility adoption is expected to reduce the country's reliance on fossil fuels, reverse the air quality worsening trends, and enable Indonesia to maximize its abundant nickel reserves, the largest in the world, a key material for making lithium-ion batteries. Of course, the transition towards cleaner energy sources away from dirty sources such as coal will finally ensure full realization of all the benefits. E-mobility pilots recently implemented by Transjakarta, Bluebird and Grab are encouraging signs for the industry development. The successful e-bus pre-trial conducted by Transjakarta from 2019 to 2020 provided the basis for the pilot of 100 e-buses being prepared and be adopted from 21-22. Transjakarta aims to only procure zero-emission buses from 2025. This will lead to an almost complete electrification of the Transjakarta fleet by 2030. Indonesia's largest taxi company, Bluebird Group, is piloting EVs too. The e-bus pilots in Bandung and Surabaya are expected to be initiated soon by the Ministry of Transportation using their by the service scheme. There will be one single e-bus corridor in Bandung and 2 e-bus corridors in Surabaya. The World Bank encourages inclusive green growth as the pathway to sustainable development. That is, growth that is efficient in its use of natural resources, cleaner in that it minimizes pollution and environmental impacts, resilient in that it is better prepared to face natural hazards, and prioritizes the role of the environmental management in preventing physical disasters, and inclusive in that it ensures that the poor and most vulnerable are not excluded from benefits. As part of the Mass-Tran project, with support from the Mobility and Logistics Trust Fund, MOLO, and the Energy and Sector Management Assistance Program, SMAP, the World Bank has been implementing a technical assignment titled E-Mobility Adoption Roadmap for the Indonesian Mass Transit Program to explore the potential to leapfrog to e-mobility technologies in the mentioned BRT projects in Greater Bandung and Greater Medan. An e-mobility roadmap has been developed for e-bus deployment in both urban areas under this technical assistance. This is the third and final virtual workshop in our series of workshops on e-mobility adoption in mass transit. The main objective of this two-day event is to discuss and validate the roadmap for the electrification of the proposed BRT systems in Greater Bandung and Greater Medan. The workshop is being delivered by the World Bank with the support of the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, ITDP, and the International Council on Clean Transportation, the ICCT. The first day of this workshop focuses on the dissemination and validation of the proposed e-mobility adoption choices and roadmap for the new BRT systems in Greater Bandung and Greater Medan. And the second session will present the main recommended policy, institutional, business, and financial model options to expedite e-mobility adoption in Indonesia. We're excited about this workshop and its potential for contributing to achieve cleaner and greener transport outcomes, and look forward to your active participation and fruitful engagement on this very important topic for Indonesia. Thank you very much, and have a great, fruitful workshop. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ibergen, for the welcoming remarks. And yes, we do hope we'll be having a fruitful and insightful discussion this morning. And ladies and gentlemen, before we move on to the next session, I would like to also once again remind you and also inform you, if you have just joined our workshop right now, I would like to inform you once again on the agenda sessions and also the topics presented for today. As you can see here, it is the rundown for our first day of the workshop, of the third workshop. And we have just concluded the opening remarks session delivered by Pak Suharto, the Director of Road Transportation, the Director General of Land Transportation, Ministry of Transportation of the Republic of Indonesia, and also welcoming remarks delivered by Mr. Ben Ibergen, Practice Manager Transport of East Asia and Pacific of the World Bank. And now the session will be followed by an opening session and also presentations and a discussion panel session afterwards. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, next we'll be continuing the agenda with the opening session, which will be presented by Mr. Ray Minhares, ICCT Program Director. So please do join me in welcoming Mr. Ray Minhares on the screen.
Hello, and good morning to you all. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you as well to representatives of DG Land Transport and World Bank for your kind remarks, and I think an important setting of the context for our work today. We're here focusing on zero-emission bus deployment in Indonesia and sustainable mobility. And there's a reason why we have this focus here. The future of public transportation will be zero emissions. And that's key to sustainable transportation. Already all major bus manufacturers around the world have offered a zero emission bus product for sale. And the question for all of you is, how do we create a policy environment and a market environment that brings those products to Indonesia and benefits all Indonesian citizens? These buses are some of the most efficient buses we've ever seen on the roads. The vehicles themselves are less costly to operate. They may have a higher upfront cost, sometimes 2 to 3 times greater upfront cost, but a significantly lower operating cost. And so that translates into significant energy savings, significant pollution savings, a significant reduction in oil consumption, and all the other benefits that come from zero-emission technologies, including low noise and better user experience. So overall, this is a smart investment in technology. Our project here is designed to support decisions at a local level, particularly in Greater Medan and Bandung, that help to translate those benefits into the real world experience. That means understanding overall what type of vehicle can deliver the diesel equivalent performance. Without having that experience so far, it's important to support that decision making with proper analysis. Decisions, for example, such as what size battery does the vehicle require? What power level do the chargers require? What location do these chargers need to have? How frequently should the charging occur? All of this analysis is part of is brought forward by our work. It requires proper study. It requires proper data collection. And particularly for the routes, the BRT routes that are intended to be supported. We have seen this analysis deliver significant deployment of e-buses in other major cities. And we're bringing that international experience to this project. As one example, the ICCT has been supporting in the city of Santiago, Chile, the deployment of e-buses. In 2018, when we began a recent project, there were just 2 e-buses on the roads. Today, there are almost 800, and the city government has procured another 991, which makes for a total of 1,700 and more e-buses. The plan is to continue at that scale of deployment. And now that leadership from the city has led to a commitment from the national government of Chile to fully electrify its bus fleet by the year 2035. We see similar actions being taken in Colombia, where the Transmilenio system, and with the support of the city council, has decided they will no longer buy diesel buses as soon as next year. And they have purchased almost as many e-buses as Santiago, Chile has. That action has also been supported by national action to fully transition to zero-emission buses also by the year 2035. And we're seeing similar efforts in the city of Sao Paulo, Brazil, where the mayor has committed to purchase 2,600 e-buses there. So the story and the direction for bus technology is clear. And as I said, it is a clear step forward for sustainable urban mobility. So our hope is that through this work, you all can benefit from the international experience and the lessons learned from that international experience. You can begin to create a new policy and market environment that creates opportunities for deploying these vehicles at larger scales. And by establishing the foundations for a successful market going forward, that Indonesia can benefit from the both the economic development that can come from manufacturing and producing these vehicles for these external markets, and also the energy, environment, and public health benefits that come from their deployment in Indonesian cities. So with that, I'm very pleased to have this work come to this stage, and really want to thank all of our project implementers from World Bank, ICCT, and ITDP. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to the rest of the team. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Minharas, for the opening session and to start our discussion for today. So ladies and gentlemen, we will now start our workshop session, but the BRT electrification roadmap in Greater Medan and Greater Bandung area. And we already have with us today 4 speakers, and please allow me to welcome and introduce briefly each speaker. The first, we have Ms. Faila Sufa, ITDP Southeast Asia Director, who will be presenting depot options, bus routes, allocation, and charging strategy. And our second speaker is Mr. Revi Petragradia, ITDP National Finance Specialist, who will be presenting the topic TCO analysis for different BEB technology. And next, we will be having Ms. Sharada Golapudi, ITDP Senior E-Mobility Expert, who will be sharing the topic roadmap for Greater Medan and Greater Bandung BRTS electrification. And for our fourth speaker, we have Mr. Janata Giwangkara, ITDP National Energy Specialist, with the topic grid analysis for BRT electrification in Greater Bandung and Greater Medan. Once again, thank you to all the speakers for joining us. And we'd like to also remind you that we will be having a panel discussion after the presentations, which will be moderated by Ms. Faila Sufa. Therefore, once again, I encourage and invite you to participate in the discussion by proposing your questions through the Zoom chat box. And the presentations will also be delivered in Bahasa and also in English. And you can use the interpretation feature that is located on the bottom right of your screen. And now, without further ado, I would like to present the screen to our first speaker, Ms. Faila Sufa. But before, please do allow me to read Ms. Sufa's short bio. Ms. Faila Sufa is currently the ITDP Southeast Asia Director. She has worked directly in around 10 countries and over 15 cities, giving technical assistance on sustainable urban mobility, mainly promoting non-motorized transport, public transport innovations, public policies. And during her work, she has been leading a number of assignments funded by international donors and building strong relationships with a variety of stakeholders, such as governments, private sectors, international financial institutions, and the United Nations development agencies. And she holds a master's degree in transport planning and engineering from the University of Leeds and a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Gajah Mada University. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Faila Sufa. And Ms. Faila Sufa, the screen is yours and your time is 40 minutes to present your presentation.
Good morning. Thank you, Sarah. Today, I will present about the findings on the study that we have done in the past few months on the selection of depot and on how we can allocate the BSRAT and the charging strategy. For the outline of my presentation, the first one, I will present about the methodology on the selection of technology for electric bus, and then we will focus on how we choose the charging strategy. The first one in Greater Medan and continue to Greater Bandung. Next slide, please. For the methodology itself, we first do an identification on the specification, the main specification to be analyzed. For example, like the daily distance per bus per route, the type of bus, and the size of the battery available in the market based on the type of bus. And then we will do an allocation of route grouping for each depot. And then we will identify how the charging that is appropriate for each size of battery. And then we will calculate the total cost for each route, for each option of battery size. How is the capex? That is the procurement of the bus, capex for the procurement of the bus, and the opex for the operational and maintenance. And we do an analysis to calculate the options that is most less expensive from all the analysis. And the last one, for us to implement it, how is the strategy or the phases in implementation of this electric bus, which will be deployed together with the implementation of BRT both in Greater Medan and Greater Bandung. The first one, the calculation of the reach of the battery in the early years of the implementation of the bus. So in the early years, which is the first and second years, so the first thing, we do a market analysis. So in Greater Medan and Greater Bandung, the type of bus has been determined from the previous study. So it will use a single bus or 12 meters and the medium bus or 9 meters, adjusted with the number of passengers and also the width of the road. From each type of bus, we do a market analysis to get the battery capacity. For single bus, that is 12 meters. One of the example, the battery capacity is 180 kilowatt hour or 324 kilowatt hour or 350 kilowatt hour. That's what's normally used. For the medium bus, 9 meter, will it use a battery capacity with 100 kilowatt hours, 160 kilowatt hour, or 180 kilowatt hour? This battery capacity is important because it will determine the achievement of the bus itself, which will have an impact on the operational and the selection of charging that will be used. We also have to pay attention that in our regulation, we have a maximum weight of the total bus, that is 16 kilogram. So it cannot be more than that, because the larger, it will be heavier. So we have to think of the maximum of the bus weight and the average of the passengers. And then there's several assumptions that we use. This is based on the earlier assumption that has been tested in several cities. For a single bus, the 12-meter one, the power consumption is 1.3 kilowatt hour per kilometer. For the medium bus is 1 kilowatt hour per kilometer. And we have also determined the state of charge, or the battery, the remaining battery should be at least 10%. If we determine all these assumptions, so let's say we have the remaining battery is 10%. So actually, the energy that is used is lower than what was already mentioned at the beginning. So for example, if it's 180 kilowatt hour, so we have to have the reserve ratio at the end. So once if we have a battery, we cannot finish it all. So the energy that can be used is only 162 kilowatt per hour. And the battery range is not 180 kilometers, but because the power consumption is 1.3, so the battery range is 125 kilowatt. And if we have 180 battery capacity, sorry, 180 kilowatt hour battery capacity, so the battery range that can be achieved is around 125 kilometers. Next slide, please. And this is the battery range when you have the degradation. So normally if we have a battery, there is the degradation period. So we calculate here the degradation period after 8 years is around 20%. So each year it will experience a certain degradation. And normally the benchmark from the implementation of BRT in other cities, such as in China and India, in the cities in those countries, so after 8 years, it will be reduced around 20%. So the battery range will then be reduced again. Next slide, please. For charging strategy, there are several charging strategy that is normally used. The first one is overnight charging at depot. So we charge when the bus returns to the depot. They will provide a facility for charging at the depot at night when the bus is not operating. And the second option is off-peak charging, whether it's in depot or in the charging facility. So normally during the off-peak hour, the bus operational is not 100%. For example, in Jakarta, it's only 60%. So it can be used to add the bus to increase their energy during the off-peak hour due to the reduction of the bus operation. This bus can be charged to the depot if the depot is closed, or they provide a place to charge along the corridor, for example, because if they will have to go back to the depot, it will consume more energy. That's one option. And the next option, with the opportunity charging by using fast charger at Terminus. So it's installed, they install a fast charging at the Terminus. For example, in Bandung Vrt terminal in Medan. So at the Terminus, normally they will stop for a longer period of time, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. So they can utilize the time by the bus to charge. Next slide, please. The first one, we will discuss about how the selection of, or the importance of selecting a depot, and then group the routes and also selection strategy in Greater Medan. So as a brief overview, this study is done by PTSMI in Medan and GIZ. They will do a feasibility study in metropolitan Bandung, and it will also be updated by World Bank for the routes and corridor. For the Medan Brt corridor, starts from the Bandung Vrt terminal to Terminal Amplas. The total length is 21 kilometers, and the number of stations are 33 stations. And the direct service route, there are 19 direct service routes. So these are the selected routes which will not only pass through Medan, but also Delhi Serdang, Binjai. So there are 19 routes with a total of number of buses which will be operating as much as 412 buses, and the type of bus is there's single bus, 12 meters, or medium bus, the 9-meter one. So this is a different case with the one in Jakarta. In Jakarta, it's already established. Electrification here, because we do it at the same time with the implementation of BRT. So the selection of operator is also very important to be well considered, because there are several considerations that we do on how we divide the operators with these 412 buses. So these are our considerations. With the 412 buses, we propose to be divided into 4 operators. So each operator will operate around 100 buses. This is also based on to invest on the staff, back office, maintenance, and with the number of 100 buses, 100 to 150 buses, it would be more economical. And also with more than one operator, it would be possible to have a more competitive tender.
Diharapkan nantinya operator-operator,
even though we expect that these existing operators can join or can be integrated in this BRT system. Next slide, please. So we also do a benchmarking on how many operators is in Transjakarta. In Transjakarta, normally the number of the operators is around 100 to 130 buses. So they operate around 100 to 130 buses for the articulated bus, single and medium size. For the BTS system, for all operators, in average, they operate around 75 buses. Next slide, please. Next one is how we allocate the depot for all of these operators. Because the distance and the allocation of depot is important because it influences the dead kilometers or 0 kilometers from the distance of the depot to the BRT corridor where the bus will operate. So the one in Greater Medan, there are 2 depots proposed, that is Depot Pinang Baris and also Amplas. For the ownership of Depot Pinang Baris, partly is owned by the city government and partly owned by the central government, in this case, the Ministry of Transportation. And for Amplas, part of it is owned by the city government and partly owned by the Ministry of Transportation. But in the Ministry of Transportation, in Depot Amplas, we receive information that there are plans to develop this depot. So the use of Amplas depot should be coordinated with the Ministry of Transport. I will skip this one. So in allocating for each operator, so we propose there are 4 operators in each depot. Based on the characteristics of the depot of Pinang Baris and Amplas, we propose several alternatives. The first alternative is 3 depots will be placed in Pinang Baris. So there's 3 operators. So one operator will operate 1 depot and 1 depot in Amplas. Why only 1 depot? Because part of the location of depot in Amplas it will also be used by the Ministry of Transportation. And due to the limitation of the depot Pinang Baris, because they will build 3 depots for 3 operators, which should actually accommodate 300 fleets. There's also a proposed scenario for the Pinang Baris depot. If the place is not sufficient, they can build a 2-story depot. And the second one, they can maybe procure a land in the surrounding area of Depot Pinang Baris, because we see that there's still available plot there. And the second alternative, if the Amplas depot can be used, so we propose to divide the operator in Depot Pinang Baris and Depot Amplas. So these 2 operators in Depot Amplas.
Seperti yang saya sampaikan tadi, ini perlu ada koordinasi dengan Kementerian Perhubungan. Next, berikut detail dari tiap-tiap alternatif.
This is the detail of each alternative suggested. Next slide. If first alternative, let's say we would like to develop 3 depots in Pinang Baris and in Amplas. First, we need to develop a high-story building for depot in Pinang Baris. If we do not want to provide area in its surrounding, and we need also to provide area or empty land which is close to the Pinang Baris depot. And the decision to decide whether we will use alternative 1 or alternative 2, and whether we need to purchase a new land, perhaps it will be made by the government. Next slide. For alternative 1, where 3 operators will be placed in Depo Pinang Baris, so operator 1, 2, 3 or ABC, and 1 operator in Amplas. This is the scenario for the grouping. So the placement of the operator or grouping of each route, so operator 1, Pinang Baris, will operate around 6 routes, with the total of the fleet is 105. So we also make a grouping for each route to be operated in certain operators. So the selection of the route grouping for each operator is done based on several considerations, including kilometer per day and based on the distance of that kilometer from depot to the operational or to the corridors. And the division of these 4 operators can be mentioned as operator A, B, and C, then D. And each operator operates approximately 100 buses. And the kilometer for each operator is approximately 200 kilometers. For the determination of the charging of the infrastructure itself, since this is very important to determine the charging infrastructure used to operate this electric bus, there are several criteria. First, to determine the range of the kilometers of each route per day, and we need to determine the reach of the battery of each bus, and if the battery reach is smaller from the daily kilometer, then to charge in depot is not sufficient. So it requires an opportunity charging. So charging option can have several combinations. First, if daily kilometer is higher than the battery capacity or the range battery, so they should charge it in the depot at night or when the bus is standby. And number 2, if it is not sufficient to charge at night, we can add it by charging during the peak hour or midi charging. If midi charging is still not sufficient, we can do also overnight charging, where we can install fast charging in each final stop. Next is the charging strategy for single bus. We have analyzed this for alternative 1. I have mentioned earlier that the bus operated have 2 types, single bus and medium bus. Single bus is 12 meters, medium bus is 9 meters. And we do this market study using to determine the capacity of the battery required. So there are 3 capacities of the battery that we exercise. Single bus with 350 kilowatt hour battery capacity and 324 kilowatt hour and 180 kilowatt hour. We exercised on how, if the performance of each bus type with the battery type before there is a degradation, or in the early year, 1 or 2 years, or after there is a degradation. For overnight charging, it was just in the first years with the relatively high capacity of the battery, 350 kilowatt hour. So the majority of the single bus requires additional charging facilities. So it is not just using overnight charging. Next slide. This is for medium bus. And even for medium bus, just charging at night, it is not sufficient.
Tambahan untuk,
and we need additional for midday charging and fast charging in the terminal, final terminal. Next slide. For alternative two, we plan to build 2 depots or 2 operators in Pinang Baris and 2 operators in Amplas. Next slide. Can I continue? And we do also a grouping for each operator. So there are 4 operators suggested. Operator A, B, C, D, and E. Next slide. And for charging strategy, for single bus, there are 4 routes using single bus from 14 routes. So in the beginning, when we use the capacity of 350 kilowatt hour, we charge in depot because it's sufficient. But in the next year, we need to get additional charging in the morning. For example, the charging facility in final terminal, or we need to install, or we can require a charging during the peak hour. Meantime, for medium bus, which is 9 meters, there are 5 routes using medium bus. So even everything requires additional charging strategy. So it is not sufficient to do the overnight charging, but it requires midday charging facility. So among all the routes, we can conclude that charging only in the depot is not sufficient. So maybe we need to do also the additional power during the peak hour, or even it is necessary to develop facilities charging in the terminals or in final terminals. Next slide. This is the summary from the allocation of depot and the selection of charging facility. So for alternative 1, where we use Depot Pinang Baris to develop 3 operators in 3 depots. First is depot in Amplas, and second alternative, 2 operators or 2 depots are developed in Pinang Baris and 2 depots is developed in Amplas. For allocation of the depot alone, for first alternative, since the area is not sufficient to develop, is not big enough, the area is not big enough, so we need to develop a high-story building for depot. And for depth kilometer analysis,
penumpang kosong kalau bisa,
or for zero passenger,
pada saat apa namanya kita dari depo ke
when we go from depot to the service corridor, the total depth kilometer is from the 19 route is for about 438 kilometers per day. Or compared with alternative 2, it is higher for about 13 kilometers. And if we calculate for about a year, it can reach 148,000 kilometers. If we compensate with rupiah per kilometer, it can be in a year we can pay 3.1 billion per year. If the lifetime of this fleet is for about 5 years, then we have to pay until for about 46 billion.
Kemudian jika kita
10 more minutes.
Ya, saya akan cepat untuk Bandung. Next, before masih belum selesai tadi. Ya, dan untuk depo yang kedua,
for the second depot,
di Amplas,
depot in Amplas,
Pinang Baris,
and 2 in Pinang Baris,
apa namanya, lebih efisien.
It is more efficient compared to alternative 1 because the distance from depot and the corridor is closer, but it needs coordination with the Ministry of Transportation to get to use their asset in Amplas.
Sekarang untuk yang
Now for Greater Bandung,
jadi koridor BRT-nya itu
BRT corridor
from west
is from west to northeast, from the border of Bandung City to Ahmad Yani Street for about 18.3 kilometers, and we have the direct service route. So this is the direct service route. For the bus type is the same, using medium and single bus. So starting from Bandung, and it operates in Cimahi, Bandung Regency also, and the total of the fleet, which will be deployed for about 225 buses. Next slide. For the number of operators alone, to operate 225, the analysis that we use or the approach that we use is similar with what we use in Medan. So each operator operates for about 75 until 100 fleets. Therefore, for BRT, or the number of operator in Bandung, it can be 2 until 3 operators. Next slide. To allocate the depot, there are several depots suggested. Number 1 is Kebon Kawung Depot and Gede Bage Depot. However, Kebon Kawung Depot is now used by Damri, and Gede Bage Depot, even though the area is relatively big, but it is quite far from the BRT service corridors. So we hope that the depth kilometer will be farther. So we suggest that there are 2 new depots. First, in Terusan Pasir Koja Street and Sukabumi Street, when the location is relatively close with the BRT service suggested. Next slide. Let me make it short because the approach is quite similar. For purpose of depot location in BBMA, we divide this into 3 alternatives. Alternative 1 only Gede Bage depot that can be utilized as BRT depot. So 2 or 3 operators will be gathered in Gede Bage depot. And Kebun Kawung, which is operated by Damri, can be used as charging strategy in midday, or we can develop facility to charge during the day. Second alternative, Gede Bage and Kebun Kawung can be utilized both as BRT depot. So we need to discuss further with the Ministry of Transportation and also with Damri. Kebun Kawung is selected because of its proximity to the BRT corridor. Alternative 2 is divided into 2A and 2B. 2A, all depot is allocated in Gede Bage, but Kebun Kawung depot, since the area is relatively narrow now, it is not as big as, is not sufficient to be utilized as one depot. So it can be developed for charging during the peak hours during the day. So the difference between alternative 1 and alternative 2, Gede Bage is used as BRT depot for all operators, and we cannot use depot Kebun Kawung at all. 2A, all operators will use Gede Bage depot, but Kebun Kawung can be utilized, or Kebun Kawung can be developed. For example, we can develop a charging facility that can be used during the day. Alternative 2B, one depot can be placed at Kebun Kawung and one depot is in Gede Bage. And the third alternative, so we develop new depot in the area suggested, which is in Jalan Terusan Pasir Koja and Jalan Sukabumi. Next slide. 5 more minutes. For alternative 1 depot, everything will be allocated in Gede Bage. Next slide. This is a grouping from the route for each operator. So the total average of the operator is about 100 fleets. And this is alternative 1 for charging strategy for single bus. And for the beginning, we just need overnight charging. But in the following years, it may be 2 years until the battery is 8 years old. We need to have additional charging facility like fast charging in the terminus or in the midday charging. Same with medium bus. For medium bus, even to charge at night, it is not sufficient. So we need to provide additional charging facilities. For second alternative, there is alternative 2A and alternative 2B. Alternative 2A, all fleet or all operators will use Gede Bage area as a depot. And Kebun Kawung is used as a charging facility. And 2B is if Gede Bage and Kebun Kawung can be benefited both as depot. This is grouping of each route. So it is the same. Each operator will operate for about 100 fleets with the average of kilometer for about 200 kilometers per day. For charging strategy for single bus, for 2A, we can use the big battery. It is possible to do overnight charging in the first years, but for the following years, additional charging technology such as fast charging or midday charging is required. For medium bus, for alternative 2A for medium bus, for overnight charging alone, it is not sufficient. So we need to provide additional charging facility. Next slide. For alternative 2B, the grouping is the same. The approach is the same. So the charging strategy for single bus is the same. For initial years, we use the big battery. Overnight charging is sufficient. But in the following years, it requires additional fast charging facility.
Ya, untuk alternatif 3.
For alternative 3, time is up.
Ya, alternatif 3. Jadi kami usulkan
alternative 3, so we suggest previously. Alternative 3.
Ya. Kami usulkan ada
We suggest that there are 2 locations which are potentials to become a depot, which is in Terusan Pasir Koja Street and in Sukabumi Street, where this location is very close with service BRT service corridors. So the depth kilometer is relatively low. And this area can be utilized as charging facility during the day. And since its location is relatively close to the BRT service corridors, so if requires the place or time to charge the power, they can go back to the depot. So depot can also be utilized as charging facility during the day. Next slide, because this is the same. Next slide. We go to discussion. This is the conclusion of each alternative of depot location and charging facilities that we exercise. And actually, the selection of the area in Terusan Pasir Koja Street and in Sukabumi Street is quite difficult. Alternative 2B can become a selection also, can be a preference also, where Kebun Gede Bage and Kebun Kawong are utilized as depot of the BRT service. Next slide. Key takeaways. To select the location of depot, it is very crucial because there will be an impact for depth kilometer that will add to the daily kilometers, and it can impact also to the selection or the additional of charging facility, which will be influential to the total cost of ownership of the deployment of the electric bus itself. My apology if time is a little bit more, if I consume more time. That's all my presentation. It can be continued with discussion during discussion panel. Thank you very much.
And next, ladies and gentlemen, for our second speaker, we have Mr. Revi Petra Gradia. And before I welcome Mr. Revi Petra Gradia, please allow me to read his short biography. Mr. Revi Petra Gradia is ITDP's National Finance Specialist for e-mobility adoption strategies for the Indonesian Mass Transit Program. He has extensive experience in infrastructure project development, and during the last 10 years, he has been mainly working with international development agencies and donors, and his fields of expertise include project financing, toll road, urban transport, and also road safety. He obtained a master's degree on highway engineering and development and bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the Bandung Institute of Technology. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Revi Petra Gradia. And Mr. Petri, your time for the presentation is 20 minutes.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for the introduction. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for the time. We can continue. In relation to the presentation that I would like to deliver about total cost ownership. Next slide. What is total cost ownership? It is more about determining the total of the cost of a product or of a bus compared with the costs, indirect or direct costs during the era of the bus service. So for diesel bus, the total life cycle is 10 years, and for electric is 15 years.
The math parameter used for this TCO calculation, there are four cost components. The first one is capital cost, or known as capital cost, where it includes the cost from the buses itself and the battery and the charges. For the operational cost, the assumption we used are includes the human resources cost and efficiency cost for the e-buses, and the maintenance cost relates to the maintenance cost of the buses and the charging facilities. And the last one is the salvage value. And this is the formulation for the TCO, is capital cost minus salvage value plus maintenance cost and operational cost. Next slide, please. This is the methodology of the TCO calculation. In principle, as explained by Ms. Vaila, about the technical assumption, because our calculation really depends on the technical assumption used. And then we make the model of these technical assumptions. And then we identify the cost of the vehicles or the buses. We use several references or lessons learned, which we gain from the studies in other countries, for example, like Santiago, Chile, and other countries such as Shenzhen. And for the price of the bus, we did a market research. Several bus manufacturers, we try to identify, for example, like the one coming from China and Europe and other countries such as India, we try to identify. And then the charging facilities, we also try to identify by doing a market research based on the assumption of use or charging strategy assumed in the technical calculation. After we draft the model, then we did the analysis, and from the analysis, we get the TCO calculation, and then we compared it between the electric bus with the diesel bus. And we also consider this alternative strategy or scenario, both related to the type of bus and the capacity of the battery, and also the scenario of the depot and charging scenario. From all of that, we try to find the most optimum or the most beneficial based on the TCO per kilometer for the bus. And the last one, we also did a CTV analysis from the several parameters used in this TCO calculation. Next slide, please. I don't need to explain about this, about the scenarios in Bandung Raya and Medan, where for Bandung Raya, the one chosen is scenario 2B, and for the Medan, we choose the scenario 2. Next slide, please. So this is the result of the TCO for Bandung Raya. So these are the summary or overview related to the TCO of alternative 2B, which we try to calculate. Based on the analysis, for the single buses, there are 5 routes using single bus from route D5, D9, T2, and T5. This is based on the technical analysis that they will use a single bus model that is 12 meters. And we try to calculate whether this electric bus with the specification of 12 meters, and then we also calculate how the cost. Based on the graph presented on the screen, from the type of the bus of single, both using 350 kilowatts and 324 and 180 kilowatt, based on our calculation, in average of the TCO per kilometer, the lowest is 32 per kilowatt hour. Apart from the cost component, there are quite a lot of markets, and the price is also quite competitive in the market. As for this TCO model, we can also see the longer the distance served, we can say that the total cost will be higher. But if we divide with the life cycle and also the kilometers length, then it will be lower. For example, this is for the T2 routes. The total cost is higher, but if you look at the cost per kilometer, it's lower, around 0.98 US dollar per kilometer. Next slide, please. This is for the medium bus. So there's around 11 routes in Bandung Raya, which based on the technical discussion, will use a medium bus. In the medium bus, there are 3 types of electric bus, starting from the 100 kilowatt hour, 160, and then 180 kilowatt hour. Out of all of these, we can see that the average of our calculation, the medium bus with the type of 160 kilowatt hour provides the lowest TCO price. So for the medium bus type, 160 kilowatt hour, the price is quite competitive. There are quite a lot who use this type, so the price is also cheaper. Next slide, please. Here we try to compare it with a trolley bus. A trolley bus is, we try to take this from the study in Lubin, Colombia. So trolley bus is a bus, but they have a separate lane because it's like a commuter line, but they're using wheels. The issue is for the trolley bus price, the market price, which we use US, is around $770 per bus. So when we try to compare with the available electric bus, the TCO is quite big, the difference. So for the deployment of electric bus, the most appropriate is the single bus model. And for this trolley bus, the issue is the infrastructure that needs to be built is quite long. And the infrastructure is quite expensive based on the reference that we used. Next slide, please. You only have 10 minutes more. So here we try to calculate if the TCO diesel, we also add the pollution cost component. We use the reference from the IMF data from Getting Price Right 2014, where from this study, there is a USD per ton price, especially for Indonesia. So we try to adjust it from the price in the year 2020 to the year 2021, where the pollution cost that we use is for particles, M2125 and NOx, SO2, and the greenhouse gases or CO. And for the emission data from our team, from the environment team, so from the calculation which we refer to IMF, we get that in average for a single bus, the total pollution per year or annual is between 13,000 to 20,000. And for the medium bus is around 7,500 to 10,380 US dollar per bus. So this is the pollution cost, which will be an additional cost in the TCO of diesel bus. So this is an overview related to TCO. So this is a TCO diesel without pollution and the diesel with pollution. So with this comparison, the TCO will increase if it's for single bus. It will increase by 23.24% for TCO without pollution. And for the medium bus, it's around 13 to 0.8%. So with this increment, we can see how far the economic cost is calculated and shows that the diesel has more cost compared to the electric bus. Here we also calculate based on the alternative of charging scenario. So based on the alternative charging, there are several alternatives charging used in the technical analysis. First one is how we compare by adding charging facilities or adding buses. Based on our calculation using the TCO used, out of these three alternatives, we can see that alternative 3 provides a TCO that is lower and more competitive compared to 2B, because 2B and 3, the position of the depot is quite close and the depth kilometer is quite good. So the TCO becomes lower compared to other alternative. This includes the add more bus alternative. Next slide, please. So this is for the scenario to compare between the ad hoc charger and the MO bus. You can see that from our calculation that with the comparison of the scenario by adding buses or adding charging facilities, we can see that by adding bus, it will increase the TCO value, because by adding the bus, the capex cost will increase. and the operation will also increase. So we see that for the optimization, we will add more charging facilities. So we can see the comparison here, the difference for each type, the both single and medium bus. Next slide, please. So before that was based on type, and now we try to compare the routes. So you can see that the total cost for each routes, and then we compare it so that for adding more buses, the total cost is larger rather than add more charger. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the sensitivity of the analysis for the Greater Bandung area. Some of the components that we used is we did a swing analysis around 5% from all the parameters that we used, starting from the price of the bus, and from the operation, maintenance, cost of charger and battery, up to the rupiah per kilowatt hour or the electricity cost. So we did this swing analysis of an average of 5% from both the medium bus, short bus, and we see that the staff and overhead cost for the operational cost provides quite some change, even though it's not significant, because using the plus minus of 5%, the increase is still below 5%. So you can see that from the available parameters for the single buses, the one that is most affected is staff and head cost, and then the price of the bus itself. And the last one is the maintenance. For the medium bus, we can see that what's most influential is staff and head cost. Next one is maintenance cost, and the next one is the price of the bus itself. So these are the three components which we think influence the calculation of the TCO. We also did an analysis if the contract period is shortened. So for baseline, for the electric bus, based on the analysis and references in several studies, is around 500%. If we shorten it, so the TCO will increase. And if we shorten it again, the TCO will increase again. So we see that for the single bus and medium bus, if the life cycle is reduced into 10, so then it will increase to 21.15%, and we increase to 8%, then it will increase to 21.83%. And for medium bus, if we increase to 10 years, and if we decrease it, it will change to 0.95. So you can see that by we calculate the maximum life cycle, it will provide a more optimum TCO. You have 3 more minutes, sir. I will be faster for Greater Medan. So for Medan, for single bus, the total is around 14 routes, where similar to the previous calculation for Bandung, that almost all routes provide a good figure from the BCO of 3 to 4. So this is the selection of electric bus for single bus. Next slide, please. This is the TCO per kilometer. So before, sorry, that before was using TCO per kilometer, and this is based on the total cost. This is similar to the Bandung comparison. Next slide, please. And this is for the medium bus. Sorry, can you go back? For the medium bus, as per the mentioned that we choose the alternative 2. So the medium bus, 120 kilowatt hour, provide a DCO kilometer that is more optimum. And this was also mentioned because the price is quite competitive. Next slide, please. And this is also one of our analysis. So if it's done in the trolley bus and the result is quite significant on the price of the TCO, and yeah, because it's more expensive. Next slide, please. This is more or less the same for the pollution cost. For the increase or addition of the pollution, it will improve the TCO for the descent that single. It's 19.81%, and for the median bus, it's around 12%. And this is based on the alternative charging. You can see that based on the TCO per kilometer, the alternative 2 is providing a lower TCO per kilometer compared to alternative 1. Next slide, please. This is when you compare it based on the charging comparison by adding more bus and the terminals. It's more or less the same. So for adding more bus, we'll increase the value of the TCO.
Next slide.
Your time is up, sir. All right, just 1 more minute. This is the sensitivity analysis. This is the result, more or less the same. The components that can increase with a swing of addition of 5%. It's not significant, but we know that the highest is change to the change of staff and overhead cost. So it will impact for the TCO. And the second one related to the price of the bus and the maintenance cost. So this is what we can do. And the last one is about the contract period. Same like in Bandung. So when we reduce the time of the contract to 10 or 8, it's quite impossible to maintain the price. For example, like here in single bus, for 10 years, it's around 0.26%. And then for the medium bus, it's around 1.28%. And for the 8 years is 11.58%. So we can conclude that the TCO, the result is influenced by the cost, the bus cost, and the increase of the overhead cost, and the maintenance cost. And the last one is the life cycle cost based on the time of the contract. That's all from me, Sarah. If there's a question, we can do it through the chat column or maybe in the discussion session. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Refi, for your presentation.
And ladies and gentlemen, we will continue with our next presentation, and it will be delivered by our third speaker, Ms. Sharada Golapudi. And before I present the screen to Ms. Golapudi, I will read a short bio where Ms. Golapudi is an electric mobility practitioner working predominantly in Southeast Asia and Africa. She has worked as a technical expert with several bus operators in electric bus technology selection and developing charging strategies. She has also worked at electricity mobility startups and supporting deployment of fleet solution. And she has been involved in analyzing the impact of ride-hailing models, including perception on safety, security, and usage. She holds a master's degree in electric engineering from Syracuse University from the United States of America, and also a graduate certificate in public policy from the Takshashila Institution in India. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Sharada Golapudi. And Ms. Golapudi, your time is 30 minutes.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. I'll be talking about the implementation strategies for Greater Bandung and Medan Brt electrification. Next slide, please. So this will be the presentation outline. I'll cover the final alternative selection from the alternatives proposed, the charging strategy, and the proposed implementation phase for both Medan and Bandung Vrt implementation. So coming to Greater Medan, to recall, next slide, please. These are the routes in Madan Brt system. There are there are 19 routes with about 14 single bus routes and 5 medium bus routes. So based on the TCO analysis, the single bus route battery capacity is selected to be the 324 kilowatt hour. And for the medium bus route, the 160 kilowatt hour battery size is evaluated. Next slide, please. So these are the different alternatives that were proposed in Medan. 2 alternatives were proposed for the 2 depot locations, Bandung Vrt and Amplus, based on the different combinations for the depots for these 2 locations. So the first alternative included 3 depots at Bandung Vrt and 1 depot at Amplus. So this alternative had the higher dead kilometers and also the higher TCO, but also it was not very significant. And some of the challenges here were regarding the usage of the depot. There was a need to build 2-story depots or procure new land to use the 3rd depot at Bandung Vrt. This involved additional documentation and approvals from the government, and also the environmental impact assessment study to be done. Also, the electric supply for this alternative could be less resilient, since the 3 depots are connected to 1 substation at Paya Delhi. And the second alternative, which provided lower dead kilometers and also lower TCO, this one has a more resilient electric supply system. Because 2 depots are connected to Paya Delhi instead of 3 depots, the substation at Paya Delhi, and the other 2 depots could be connected to the Denai substation near Amplus. So alternative 2 is selected and recommended for further analysis, including the implementation phasing and also the environmental analysis and the grid analysis, considering the pros and cons of these 2 alternatives. So a detailed charging strategy was also developed for this alternative. The detailed charging strategy involved calculating the number of chargers and also estimating the approximate time window for charging the buses. So a few factors that are considered for developing the charging strategy is the first and foremost is to limit the charging episodes to 1 per day. This helps in better management of the battery health and also reduces the complexity of operations while helping increase the battery life for the buses. Also looking at number of trips on the route and understanding how soon after the peak hour can the battery be charged. And also looking at the headway during the peak and off-peak periods, and also the cycle time and the energy requirement on the route, and understanding when can the bus be charged to accommodate the additional charging energy in 1 episode for that route. And also optimizing the number of chargers that are required at the terminus. Can you go to the previous slide? Yeah, so the number of chargers can also be optimized at the terminus based on cycle time, the headway time, and the total window that is available for charging. The number of chargers is also estimated based on the battery degradation at the end of year 8. Assuming a 20% battery degradation, you will see additional requirement of chargers because the range of the battery reduces due to the degradation we see. So for midday charging also, the buses are assume that the buses can get charged during midday hours in the off-peak time. And the number of chargers is calculated based on the energy required and the charger power and efficiency. So next slide, please. So this is a summary of the charging strategy. There is both midday charging at depot and fast charging at terminus. So the fast charging at terminus happens when the dead kilometers to the depot is more than 5 kilometers. So this, this necessitates even more energy requirement on the route. So hence fast charging is adopted for such routes. And where dead kilometers is less than 5 kilometers, midday charging is proposed at the depot locations during off-peak hours. So for Medan, we see only 2 routes which require fast charging at terminus, though not in the initial years of operation. The fast charging requirement is seen after 4 or 5 years of operation for these routes. All the other routes, both medium and single routes, will require midday charging. It is seen that the number of midday chargers that are required during for the midday opportunity charging can be met by the total number of overnight chargers that are there at the depot. So going on to the implementation phasing. So we consider 2 strategies for the implementation. One is the full electrification scenario, and the other is the partial electrification scenario, where there will be a mix of both diesel and electric buses. So the full electrification scenario, some of the advantages that are posed by this scenario is the infrastructure will be 100% prepared for the electric buses, and all the necessary resources such as the maintenance, the capacity building, and the staff, etc., will be focused entirely for the electric buses. We do not need to wait for another contract period to end to fully electrify the fleet, and also it has a higher impact on the greenhouse gas reductions. Some of the disadvantages for this scenario are that the technology is still nascent, and the charging infrastructure and the availability of e-buses in Indonesia is limited. Also, the bus operators have limited experience in operating electric buses. It's a new experience for them. If there are any issues with the electric buses, this will also impact the operations of the BRT system. And of course, this entails higher capital cost owing to the fact that the e-buses have a higher upfront cost than the regular conventional ICE buses. No, the previous slide. Can you please continue on the previous slide? So the partial electrification scenario is also proposed. It reduces the initial capex because there is a mix of both electric buses and diesel buses. And also it is possible to analyze the performance comparison between both the ICE and the electric buses. And if there are any issues with the electric buses, the diesel buses serve as a backup. Some of the disadvantages here, however, are we need to provide separate infrastructure for both ICE and the electric buses, and this may incur higher costs. And to fully electrify the entire system, we will have to wait for the contract period for the diesel buses to end and start a new contract for the electric buses. So the wait time is increased for full electrification. And also the fleet management could become more complex in terms of maintenance and operations for both because you will be dealing with both electric and diesel buses. and there will be separate infrastructure involved. So coming to the implementation phase for the scenario 1. So assuming the scenario 1, so in both the scenarios, a pilot phase is recommended where 10% of the total fleet for each operator is deployed in the pilot phase. This will help in understanding the operations, what is the power consumption, and also the issues with electric buses, and also manage the charging. The pilot is also included in the procurement phase. One of the main considerations for route selection for the pilot phase for each operator is the charging strategy. It should not require any additional charging infrastructure, very minimal charging infrastructure. So overnight charging routes or routes with depot charging with minimal depot charging are preferred. Also, routes with medium demand are preferred. This will ensure good visibility and also return on the investment for the operators. And also, they'll be able to estimate the passenger loading factor on the power consumption by selecting a medium demand route than selecting routes with very low demand. The routes, since the routes have already been established for the BRT system in both Medan and Bandung, in order to maintain the minimum level of service for the passengers, we are proposing a 70% of implementation in the first year, which includes the pilot phase, and the rest 30% will be implemented in the second year. Next slide, please. So this is the summary for the Medan implementation phase scenario 1, where for each operator, these are the routes that are selected for each of the operator. Each operator is piloting about 10 buses in the first year, and the total number of buses that are implemented in the first year will be 70% of each operator's fleet, and the rest 30% will be implemented in the second year. So this scenario is about 100% electrification by the end of the 2 years. So this is the summary for the scenario 1. Each operator or each of the operators is piloting 10% of their fleet and about 71 to 73% of electrification in the first year, and about 27 to 29% in the second year. So in this scenario, these are the routes that are being piloted: KPUM 23, KPUM R70, KPUM MRX, and KPUM 64 for each of the operators respectively. So overall in this scenario, we are seeing a 72% of electrification in the first year and the 28% in the second year. So coming to scenario 2, where we talk about partial implementation for the phasing. So the partial implementation involves using a mix of diesel buses and electric buses. The assumption for the pilot bus deployment is same as in scenario 1. Each operator will be piloting 10% of their total fleet, and the pilot phase is included in the procurement package. The selection criteria for the pilot routes is also same as scenario 1, where routes which require only overnight charging or very minimal depot charging are selected for the pilot routes. And again, 70% of the buses will be deployed in the first year, and the rest 30% will be deployed in the second year. So additional considerations for the partial implementation is that the diesel buses will be implemented on routes which require additional charging infrastructure, especially at the terminus. This would reduce the overall cost and also minimize any operational complexity in the first year of implementation. Additionally, if any operator is operating less than 50% of the electric buses in their total fleet, then again a mix of diesel and electric buses is used in both first and second year. The overall electrification for each operator is maintained in the range of 50 to 80% of their total fleet. And the overall electrification of the entire BRT system should be at least 70% by the end of the 2-year span. So this is the summary for the implementation phasing. Each operator is again implementing about 10 buses in the pilot phase. And as you can see, there is a mix of electric buses and diesel buses based on the demand and the charging strategy on that route. So this is the summary for the scenario 2. So there is the routes that are piloted are KPM 23, KPUM MRX, KPUM 64, and KPUM 04. These will there is a difference from what we saw in scenario 1 based on the selection criteria for the pilots. And also, as you can see here, the overall electrification on this route is about 73%, and there will be 27% of diesel buses by the end of the total implementation. And also each operator has
10 minutes. You have 10 minutes left. I'm sorry, 15 minutes left.
So also each operator has a minimum of 50% electrification and not more than 80% electrification. This is also to make sure that all of the operators are kind of equalized in their implementation selection, and also they have similar experience in operating the electric buses. Next slide, please. So going forward to the Bandung Vrt implementation, this route has 16 routes with 11 medium bus routes and 5 single bus routes. Again, for the medium bus routes, the 160 kilowatt-hour battery size was first evaluated, and the single bus battery size is 324 kilowatt-hour based on the TCO analysis. Now, yeah. So these were the alternatives for the depot locations. Alternative 1 being only using Gedebage depot for all the routes. Alternative 2, considering the usage of Kebu Kawung depot also. This again posed further sub alternatives, which included Kebu Kawung only as a charging facility, and the other alternative of using Kebu Kawung also as a depot and Gedebage as the other depot. And alternative using 2 new depots at 2 new locations. And these locations are closer to the corridor compared to the Gedebage depot. So looking at the pros and cons for each of these alternatives, alternative 1, Gedebage depot only. the advantage here is that it is owned by the government and there is no need to procure any additional land. However, this alternative poses higher dead kilometers. It's very far from the corridor and also a higher TCO result because of that. The second alternative, the 2A, which uses Kebo Kaung as a charging facility only. Again, here, the advantage here is the Kebo Kaung facility can be used as a charging facility. However, since Gedebago depot is the only depot here, again, it poses the same disadvantages as the alternative one in terms of higher dead kilometers and higher TCO result. Alternative 2B uses Kebo Kaung also as one of the depots and Gedebage as the other depot. Here, because Kebo Kaung is being used as one of the depots, the dead kilometers is lower than what we see in alternative 1. And hence, the TCO results are also lower compared to both alternative 1 and 2A. The electricity supply is also a little more resilient in this scenario because one of the substations that could be used here is Braga, which is near Kebo Kaung. So the overall energy demand and power demand is split between two substations in this case.
Your time is 10 minutes.
Yeah. However, compared to the third alternative, this alternative also poses a higher TCO and a higher dead kilometer. The third alternative being looking at 2 new locations closer to the corridor. So we have lower dead kilometers and lower TCO. But however, it poses greater challenge in terms of land acquisition and the additional documentation that is required for acquiring that land. So alternative 2B is proposed for further analysis, including the implementation phasing and also the grid analysis and the financial analysis and environmental analysis later on. So the detailed charging strategy is again similar to what we discussed for Medan. It involves calculating the total number of chargers required and also estimating the time windows for charging the buses. The main factors that are involved in developing this strategy is to limit the charging episodes to reduce the complexity of operations. And also optimizing the number of chargers based on the total number of trips, the cycle time, the headway time. All these factors are considered in calculating the total number of chargers and the charging windows. And also what is the additional number of chargers that are required due to battery degradation by year 8. Next slide, please. So this is the summary of the charging strategy for both midday charging at the depot and fast charging at the terminus. So what we have seen here is for the fast charging at the terminus, when dealing with medium buses, the 160 kilowatt hour battery size was posing more challenges in terms of requiring more number of charging episodes and also increasing the uncertainty of the same. So a higher battery size is recommended for the medium buses, which is 230 kilowatt hours. This reduces the fast charging requirement and also reduces the operational complexity thereby. The charger power is 150 kilowatt for both the midday charging at the depot and the fast charging at the terminus. Here we see there are 7 routes which require fast charging at the terminus, and all the other routes require only midday charging. And also there is additional fast charging requirement base for each route, either at year 2, 4, or 5, depending on the route due to the battery degradation. So the same scenarios are proposed here for the implementation phasing. The first one being the 100% electric, and the second one, the partial implementation of both the diesel and electric buses. And similarly, for the pilot phase, 10% of the total fleet is piloted for each of the operators. The route selection is again based on the charging strategy, where only overnight charging is sufficient, and routes with medium demand are selected to account for the passenger loading factor, and also account for more visibility of electric buses during the pilot phase. So again, 70% of the buses will be implemented in the first year, and the 30% will be implemented in the second year. The 70% of the buses in the first year includes the pilot phase.
Ms. Golapudi, your remaining time is 5 minutes for the presentation. Thank you.
Next, yeah. So this is the scenario one summary. We have 2 operators. Each operator is deploying about 8 to 15 buses in the pilot phase. The pilot is selected based on the selection criteria just discussed. Next. So this is the summary. Overall, we see an electrification of 73% in the first year and 27% in the second year. And the routes that are piloted here are K30 and T5, K30B and T5. So for the scenario 2, alternative 2, similar to what was discussed earlier for Medan, there will be a mix of both diesel and electric. The diesel buses will be implemented on routes which require fast charging at terminus. And also one of the factors is to maintain an electrification of 50 to 80% for each operator, and an overall electrification of at least 70% by the end of the 2 years for the entire fleet of the BRT system. So this is the summary for scenario 2. We have D5 and T5 for each of the operators here. You can see a mix of diesel buses and electric buses in each year. Overall, each operator has a minimum electrification of 50%. At least 50% and not more than 80%. We see that in the overall electrification is about 70% here, and 30% of the buses will be diesel buses by the end of the implementation. So that is the summary for the implementation phase. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you, Sarah. Over to you.
Likewise, thank you as well to Ms. Shara Golapudi for the presentation. And ladies and gentlemen, we will continue the presentation session with our next speaker, Mr. Janata Giwangkara. Present the screen to Mr. Janata Giwangkara. I will read his short bio, where Mr. Giwangkara is an energy and climate practitioner and serves as ITDP energy specialist for e-mobility adoption strategies for the Indonesian Mass Transit Program. He is passionate about decarbonization and also net zero transition, including electric vehicles. He is a senior project manager at ClimateWorks Australia, and also previously worked as an energy transformation manager at Jakarta-based energy think tank called the Institute for Essential Services Reform. Our speaker also has portfolios with multinational development agencies, and especially in climate and energy related works. He holds a master's degree in energy, sustainability, and environment from the University of Auckland, and also an undergraduate degree in applied climatology from Institut Pertanian Bogor, or IPB, in Indonesia. So without further ado, Mr. Janata Giwangkara, the time and screen is yours, and your allocated time for the presentation is 15 minutes.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. In this last session, I'd like to discuss about the result of the analysis and the output of 3 main points in 2 case studies in Bandung and in metropolitan Medan. The first is about the estimation of the number of electricity from the charging of the power that has been discussed by Paila and Revi and Strada set, and also supply stake from the analysis. And number 3, about how the behavior of and what is the impact of the charging station to the infrastructure. And then we come to Bandung first. And for Bandung, as mentioned earlier, there will be 16 routes. Next slide. There are 16 routes, but what I need to underline here is that the analysis done is using 100% electrification scenario. So all buses are electrified, and we calculate also the number of bus operating. So we do not touch the reserve bus because the number is more, as presented by Faila, Revi, and Sharada. And for the one that is operated in Bandung, approximately 200 buses consisting of 2 bus types. First is 212 meters, or about 300 kilowatt hour, and medium bus, 9 meter, consisting of 2 capacity of battery is 230 and 260 kilowatt hours of the battery capacity. And we use 2 depot suggested in Kebon Kawung, and we combine that with the charging facility in Kebon Kawung. And Kebon Kawung can be served overnight and medium charging, while in Gede Bage, it requires opportunity charging or fast charging in the terminus. Next. In this study, we use software to Homer Grid. It is called Homer Grid to simulate the charging of the power based on the 3 scenarios presented. As the input, we would like to put the electricity tariff and type of the battery and type of the bus, and each scenario of the charging, we see the state of charge, because Ms. Fela mentioned that we put also the DOD and the charging facility. So for overnight charging, state of charge is for about 2% to 100%. And we divide that for the overnight charging. It is divided into 3 schedules, starting from 8 p.m. until 10 p.m. with the composition or with the proportion of the number of buses in is 30% in the first batch, and 50% in the second batch, and 20% in the third batch. For overnight and during the day and in Terminus, we use, everything is actually the same for output rate charging in 150 kilowatt, but at night it will drop, or we divide that into 75 maximum. But if there are charges that are not used, then automatically we can maximize it to 150. I will explain further in the next slide. From here, we try to simulate. There are several main points, 3 main points. How many sessions per day, per year, or per hour about the electricity power, and in a year, how much the kilowatt required. And for the optimization, Sarana also explained about the estimate of the number of charges, and we tested it whether with that number it can satisfy all the power requirements or with less charging station, whether or not it can meet the needs of the bus charging. Next slide. This is the snapshot in the Homer grid, in Homer model. This is at night, snapshot at night. And this is in Gede Bage, and there are two buses. We have mediums and single bus. So we put the route as and there is the proportion of the number of the bus, like how much the percentage and maximum charging, what kilowatt hour, and how much is duration per unit. And we use the on-demand method. If all the charging station is full, then the bus will be waiting. And on the left side, it is the outputs of the simulation from the data input that has been delivered. And we have session per year until session factor from the charging station. While on the right top, there are two curves. On the top is the total of the data power used during that night, and below is based on the three scenarios, and matrix column on the right hand, on the right side is the summary of the number of the initial estimate of the charging. And we can see that the total at the beginning, we implement for about 21, but in order to meet the requirements of the charging, we need for about 10 additional charger in both depot in all over Bandung.
Here we see that in a year, in Kebon Kaung and Gede Bage requires around 16.5 terawatt hour of electricity in a year, with the peak hours around 12 megawatts. Next slide, please. Is for the charging and during the off-peak. This is a snapshot in Kebun Kaung. You have 10 more minutes? For the charging, and the result is the same like before, but compared to the overnight charging, there's only one peak. That's like at 10, right? But here we have 3 peaks because it's following 3 schedules. 9 to 11, 11 to 1, and so on. So the charging follows the pattern of the schedules. And for the estimating of the charging is around 14 charging is required. And in total, we require only 13. And it can be sourced through the existing charging in the depot of Kebon Kaung. Next slide, please. This is for the terminus, or yeah, the end of the route. The duration of charging depends on the headway. So it's around 5 to 10 minutes. But for Bandung, it can be from 12 to 40 minutes. You can also see the charging pattern. There's also 2 peaks because in average, there are 2 large waves for charging. That is around in the morning and also in the afternoon. So this is the pattern. And in the terminus charging, there are around 7 locations of bus stop for the charging in the end of the terminus. Next slide is about the summary. As presented earlier, for the overnight charging and midday charging is only in these 2 depots. Requires power around 17.5 terawatt hour per year. And the energy consumption is in average for the overnight is 45 megawatt hour per day. And for the charging in the afternoon, it's 2.4 megawatt hour with different peak hours. The one at night, 15 MTA, and the afternoon is 1 MVA. This means we have to find the main post, the closest main post with this depot. And for Kebon Kawung, the closest is in Braga with a distance around 1.5 kilometers, with the existing capacity around 120 MVA and the peak demand in 35. This means with the number of estimation of power needed in Kebon Kawung, the Braga main post can fulfill the needs of charging for Kebon Kawung. The same with Gede Bage, the closest in from Gede Gabe, the distance is quite far, around 5 kilometers. With the total capacity of the main post is 120 MVA and the peak in 23. So the reserve margin is quite large to fulfill the need of Gede Bage Depot, which is around 10 MVA. The next slide is the terminus. Because there are 7 locations of terminus, requires around 6 main posts. I'm not going to explain this because the explanation I think is the same. So I tried to identify the closest. The closest one is in Cigaralaing with a capacity of 240 MVA, and the highest demand is 128. So it's still sufficient to fulfill the need, only 0.66 and so on. And the last one is the Simpang Tol Terminus Padalarang with the main post in Padalarang with the capacity of 120 MVA. So the existing post for the year 2021 is still sufficient and the capacity can be used for charging, especially if we plan to implement this in 2023 or 2024, they would most probably be upgraded. So it can be fulfilled by these main posts. Last one for Bandung in the next slide. This is the analysis with the highest load in Bandung. I got this from the West Java PLN in July. So it was 7th July of this year. So for the at night, the peak charging, there are around 13 megawatts at 10 p.m. And in the graph, you see that at 10 p.m. there is a reduction. So we have more capacity than the one used in the afternoon. During the peak charging for the terminus, it's at 2 p.m. and for midday is 3 p.m. It follows the power or the load profile that is increasing in Bandung. So the impact to the grid is minimum because the reserve margin is quite a lot because it's connected not only to the West Java power supply, but also the one in Madura and Bali. Next, we move to Medan. You have 3 more minutes. All right, thank you. I'll try to make it fast. For the depot location, as proposed, there are 4 locations. The number is 1, 2, and Ampas 1 and 2, with the charger with a variety of charging strategy in each depot. Again, we use the data of the operating bus. We do not include the backups with the electrification ratio of 100%. And the methodology is the same. What makes a difference is the set of charge in the midday charging, where in Bandung it's the same, but here we differentiate based on the need of charging, and the other parameters are the same. Next, this is the result of the simulation for the electricity load in Penang Brt Depot, and the peak is more or less the same, occurring around 10 p.m. and with the charging finished at 2 or 3 a.m. So this is the curve as in Bandung with the annual need of power with the peak hour around 6 megawatt hour. Next, for the charging in the afternoon, it's divided into 3 batch. You can see that the peak, there's only 2, because in the second batch, the population is quite large. So it can be below that for the third peak. So there's 2 peak charging with the profile as you see on the right side. And for this midday charging, the total in a year is around 3.7 terawatt hour with a peak hour around 2.6 megawatt. The last one for Terminus, there's only one peak around 10 a.m. with the highest load 190 kilowatts. So it's quite small for Medan because the one operating for this Terminus. Sorry, this is just a sample for the Jog Permai, but and the overall result is on the right hand below. Next is the analysis to the closest main post. For the 2 charging location, Pinang Baris and Amplas, we identify the main post of Mayageli and Denai. For Payageli, the distance from Pinang Baris is around 3.6 kilometers. And the number of power needed is around 13 MVA. And the capacity in Payageli is 240 with the highest in 245. So if there's an addition of 12 to 13 MVA, it can be supplied with Payageli and also the one in Denai. The next slide, please. My apologies, your time is up. Can you please summarize? So for Terminus is the same. There's 3 points of charging connected to Tragi, Kuning and Tragi, and those 3 have the capacity to use for charging in the Terminus. And the last one related to the impact is the same in Bandung. It's very minimum because it can be supplied by the reserve margin, the existing reserve margin. So at night, the peak is at 10 p.m. and the one in the afternoon is the in Terminus, and midday charging is with 11 and 10 a.m. So overall is not a lot. That's all from me. Thank you. I will return it back to Ms. Sarah. Thank you, Ms. Janata Giwangkara.
And now with the fourth presentation, therefore, I kindly re-invite speakers to come on screen for the panel discussion, which will be moderated by Ms. Faila. So without further ado, Ms. Faila Sufa, Ibu Faila, waktu dan tempat saya persilakan.
Thank you, Sarah.
Ladies and gentlemen, for attending the presentation from our team. Next is the panel discussion, which I will moderate. For the participants of the panel, please turn on your camera. Thank you, Mr. Bob Saril, for your presence.
Thank you very much.
Commerce and Customer Management dari PLN.
Dan Commerce and Customer Manager dari PLN. And then we have Mr. Agustinus Panjaitan. Good afternoon. He is from North Sumatra, Head of Transportation Division. And we have Mr. Iskandar from the Transportation Agency of West Java. We also have a representative from the Ministry of Transportation, Mr. Topik Montanasya. He will join us later. Mr. Iskandar from West Java Transportation Agency. While waiting for them, maybe we can start. So, Mr. Janata Giwankara has finished presenting the need of power required with the implementation of electrification BRT in metropolitan Bandung and Medan.
Mungkin Pak, ini pertanyaan apakah salah satu tadi yang mungkin
is any of them
oleh Mas Revi untuk total cost of
for the total cost of ownership,
paling tinggi
the highest is
pembelian teknologi atau CAPEX
from the purchase of technology or CAPEX. For PLN, is there a possibility to join with the business model? One of the example is, it was also mentioned that there is a need to install a charging infrastructure both in depot or along the corridor. Maybe you can explain further about it?
Saya Ibu Vela, is it okay? Thank you very much Ibu Vela, thank you very much Pak Janata, Ibu tadi dari Ibu Savali yang sudah memaparkan Pak Sarada Golafodi yang sudah memaparkan.
Who has provided a great presentation. So first of all, about the availability as raised by Mr. Janata about the overnight and in the afternoon. So for the available system in West Java, especially in Bandung and North Sumatra, especially in Medan Vrt, there is no issue on the availability of power in the afternoon and evening. So anytime, any place of a charging is fine, because the condition in West Java, we have overwhelmed of the power, and for North Sumatra, it's around 36%. So there is no problem if you want to do it the tower charging, or is it above that? We are ready to provide the 350 for G20 in Bali. And we are ready to continue because the network in the places where we presented by Ms. Sarada Golapudi and also Mr. Janata, those are the places where we can serve if needed. Related to the large investment, it is very challenging, and we are willing to collaborate in the economic value sharing. And it's also in the website to be read, to collaborate with either private sector or owner of the buses in the depot. We welcome the collaboration because with the electric buses, is very beneficial for us, not only for PLN, but also for the community and also for the bus operator, because apart from the clean energy, it would be more thrift. So, because the electricity, if we see the capacity is 85, and it's similar to 1 liter, so it's just 1 kilowatt hour. If we use the fuel, it's around 7,000, but if you use electricity, it's around 1,500. If we take it from the depot that we provide. So we are ready to collaborate, and of course, we can invite several places, like for the banking. We have one partner from Korean bank who will support us. We can synergize it together. And we really appreciate to the transportation agency in Bandung or West Java or North Sumatra who have initiated this project. We really support it. We are ready to collaborate and to continue this to discuss anytime with all of you. The owners or other providers of this e-bus. And also thank you to the ITDP and World Bank who together have held this study. Thank you very much. You're still muted, Ms. Vela. All right, so we can conclude that from the economy, the collaboration with the operator to support, especially for the charging infrastructure, is possible. So I hope maybe it will be the discuss again on the mechanism. I will move on to Mr. Agustinus. One of the implementation mechanism, there was the partial electric bus. So part of them were diesel and part is electric, or maybe there's an alternative to be in 100%. We can implement the electric bus. From the transportation agency, do you have any comments to this? Thank you, Ms. Vela. And distinguished participants. From our perspective, from the government of North Sumatra province, especially from the transportation agency, in principle, our objective move to the impact. So the main issue is how we reduce the impact of diesel, which will also have an impact to the environment. So it was informed to us the savings that we can make by using this e-bus. Looking at the financing, this is a consideration. We hope that we can do it all at once because the benefit is quite large. When we can working in full capacity, operating more than 400 buses by using e-bus. But the problem is to financing. Let's say it comes from the regional government. From the side of the procurement of the buses, but also the infrastructure. For electrification, this will be larger. So if there is this option and we do it partially, this will help the load for the capex. And this is also in line with our plan to implement especially the routes in direct services, which is around 19 corridors. This will greatly support, and the initial concept in the implementation in these 19 routes will be done gradually, not all at once. Not all at once. Because you know that the cost, the maintenance will be the responsibility of the provincial government. So the option or the scenario to use e-bus gradually, I think this is the best choice, because we implementing these 19 corridors, we also plan to do it gradually. This would be better. All right. So it depends on the scheme. Who will provide? If everything has to be covered by the provincial government, the capex would be quite a burden for the provincial. But if the operator or maybe there's other collaboration, it can be considered. So it really depends on the scheme of implementation. The West Java Transportation Agency, are you with us or is anyone representing you? Mr. Budi Priyanjaya?
Ya, terima kasih Bu.
Yes, thank you. Same question from West Java province. For the implementation, do you want to implement directly the 100% electric bus from the beginning? Or do you plan to have a partial implementation? So there will be electric bus and diesel bus operating together. Thank you for the question. My apologies. Mr. Iskandar have another assignment for the preparation of the year end. So with the provincial police is holding a coordinating meeting. So for the 16 corridors for Bandung Raya, these depots, we need to do another study. Several depots that was proposed, such for example like in Gede Bage, the impact of, there is an impact from the environment like flood, for example, in Gede Bage area. And the next one, as mentioned by Pak Agus from Miss Sumatra, we also need time for the preparation, so we plan to also implement it gradually. And we don't know exactly when, it depends on the budget. Okay. So the corridors that was mentioned, there are 16 and 5, so and 5 singles and 11 medium. And the charging in the depots from Mr. Bob is using human resources from PLN. So my estimate, it was actually using the renewable energy. Is there such a concept? That's all from me. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Budi. From Pak Bob, is there a special policy from PLN for the solar power system? Because we know that for charging, especially in depot, it's done at night. So in the afternoon, we need to reserve it. So maybe you can provide your comments. Thank you, Ms. Vela. Thank you, Mr. Budi, Mr. Agustinus. So if related to the solar power supply, we need to see the model business first, and then we'll see whether there's a possibility. If we add another load, as Mr. Agustinus mentioned, it will add more investment, and it will be a burden for the provincial government, whether it's in the operator or in PLN. And the next one, no need to worry about the clean energy. In West Java, there's a lot of water. So more than 60% is from water because the large ones are there. And there's also geothermal energy there. What about in North Sumatra? So Asahan, we also have Asahan. And other power supply. So PLTP is also a renewable energy. So it's sufficient more than 30%. It's below West Java, but it's above the national average, especially for North Sumatra. So in my opinion, in this opportunity as a trial, where we are quote unquote is how we save our investment cost, but it's still beneficial for operators, regional government, and PLN. So we'll use whatever is available first, and it will be more savings, and the investment can be used for other to accelerate the process. That's my answer, Mr. Agustinus, Mr. Budi, and Ibu Faela. Thank you.
Ya, terima kasih. Pak, mungkin satu lagi, Pak.
Thank you, sir. Maybe one more question for Pak Bob. We want to accelerate the implementation. Actually, electrification of the mass transportation can accelerate the ecosystem of the electrification as an overall. Is there any certain policy from the PLN? Maybe if there is any, for example, if there is specific tariff for electricity provided for public transportation, because this is becoming the basis, because it can accelerate the electrification as an overall. For example, as we have calculated, is it possible to get certain tariff? For example, 505 until 707 rupiah per kilowatt.
565. Jadi Mbak Vela, seperti Mbak Vela ketahui,
as you know, that tariff is determined by the government, because in the nutshell, all tariff in Indonesia is subsidized by the government. So everything. So even rich people are subsidized. So it is in the form of compensation, but subsidy, but the form is the same. So for the tariff determination in the management is for about 715 rupiah in the low tension. And this is for middle level. So if it is the business that should be determined by PLN, and then we will have a cooperation, but we can share the profit and how much we can sell. And of course, if there is two, operators should get the profit also. At least they have to get the return of investment, for example, providing the shelter or the charging. And we can ensure that this will be cheaper than diesel. Based on our experience in overseas, it's 1/6 of the use of the diesel. It is cheaper. So in Sweden, it is very profitable for them, especially if there are so many payback period, and it is very fast. I believe the government has given a directive like that, so we will implement this according to the order of the government in the provision of the tariff. But of course, for selling, we have to regulate the selling side, because operator colleagues should not lose profit, and they can cooperate with the banking. For example, Mr. Agustinus has already suggested that Pemda is quite heavy, the burden is heavy, but there will be profit returning. So it's the business calculation. We have to maintain that. So the price should not stress our operator friends. So the operator will not depend on the government, because it will be quite sad if the West Java and North Sumatra should provide additional budget for that. This is the last question for our gentleman from Transportation Department. Maybe you can give a suggestion This has become the consideration in our study, and we have done it from a couple of months ago. For the cooperation contract with operator, right now, we have done it for about 3 years, while the life cycle of the electricity bus is longer, and it can be 10 until 15 years. Is it possible if the lower the contract, the payment of the kilometer fee that will be asked by the government to the operator will be higher? Is it possible to be re-exercised for the contract with operators, maybe maximum 3 years, and it can be renewed? Maybe Mr. Agustinus?
Baik, Bu Fuela.
Okay, thank you, Ibu Fuela. We haven't got the provincial experience. We don't have any experience in terms of this. Maybe the ministry has done it for the one who deals with the operational of the BRT. If it can reduce the total cost of ownership, I believe it becomes a very good preference for us to consider using the more profitable contract. But of course, the regulation becomes very important as well. We need to have the regulatory consideration that regulate this. I think that's all from me, sir. Ma'am? So maybe we can make a common recommendation for the renewal of the regulation, because we see that with the extension of 3 years, and we can extend it until 6 or 9 years, it will make it difficult. And the calculation of the contract or the cost that should become the burden of the operational will be high as well, because the lifetime is shorter. That becomes our note. So actually, this has to be answered by parties from the Ministry of Transportation, but unfortunately, they cannot be present today. We will ask again to them. If Pak Bob, Pak Budi, Pak Agus would like to say something. Yes, with your permission, Ibu Faila. We have had a discussion with the Director General of Land Transportation, Pak Budi, not Mr. Budi from West Java. So he really supports this idea, and he's really happy that there will be a unit, and then we can together to make a recommendation and make a proposal that the initiation is from the local Office of Transportation, and we will help also to talk to them. And even Mr. Minister really support this. Minister has used the electric vehicle, and he's really encouraging this. And of course, it is according to Mr. Minister, he would like to reduce the deficit account because we import the fuel. And this is the COP26 is one of our main strategy to reduce this and to improve the demand that is based on the clean energy. That is very important. So transportation becomes one of the main priority. So Medan and Bandung probably can be the pilot in Indonesia. So there is nothing wrong. Maybe we can be assisted by the central government. We can ask the central government together, and we already encourage to develop the ecosystem together. If not now, when are we going to do that? So if we can ask our colleagues from the Ministry of Transportation to do that, and PLN is ready to support you. And we will communicate to the local unit, either in Bandung and in North Sumatra, in Medan. And we, from the center, please, I can type my mobile phone. You can have a discussion with me. and Ibu Vela can facilitate this, and we have some assessment from Janata and Sharada. So this is additional knowledge, and probably if we can share it to us, it will be quite, I will be quite grateful. So we can have the calculation. So if Mr. Agustinus and Pak Budi okay, then we will be ready to connect the grid there. Thank you. Thank you, Pak Bob. It's very grateful that we have the boost support from PLN for the implementation of the electricity bus in Metropolitan Medan and Bandung. Pak Agustinus or Pak Budi, maybe there will be something you want to say? Just a little bit, ma'am. In your first presentation, you also mentioned about the selection of operator. This will become very important, ma'am. So the scheme in the operation, what it looks like, and also about selection of operator. Maybe there will be a specific assessment about this, but because this is very important. In several meetings in terms of the implementation of BRT, we are talking also about operator. In this assessment, there are some operator cluster, and hopefully it will be better. If I can give suggestion, we should not cluster it based on operator, but route is, but instead we use a route cluster. So we can have a discussion why operator becomes very important. Separately, we can assess about that. So we will be able to transfer from the existing operator to the future operator who will operate this electricity bus. Thank you very much. We realized as well that operator integration and also other cities like Jakarta, Solo, Semarang, and also in Medan itself, they have done several issues, but the homework in the field is many. So the dynamic is that operator works alone, and it will be different from one city to another, even though there is the threat. Ibu Nupur can also address the concern of operator, because with your permission, Pak Bob, we actually are consultants we are consultant of the World Bank. We help World Bank to make a roadmap of implementation of electricity bus in BRT Metropolitan Bandung and in Greater Bandung and in Greater Medan. Pak Budi, perhaps the last one before I hand over to Sarah and continue with Ibu Nupur.
Baik Bu.
Okay, thank you.
Di beberapa ini juga perlu ini Bu, seperti tadi yang sampaikan Pak Agus juga.
As mentioned by Pak Agus, the scheme before we do
operator, ya mungkin
before we select the operator,
di 16 koridor yang di Jawa,
maybe in the 16 corridors in Greater Bandung, we haven't done the inventory, and we have some operators in existing operator, and there is no coordination yet between the existing operator and the operator who will do the implementation. It depends on the bidding process. If I'm not mistaken, 2 or 3 operators, right, in Greater Bandung. For 11 corridors, we need to have 3 operators. So what the scheme is like, maybe this is something that we need to be done. I think that's all from me. Thank you. Thank you, Pak Agustinus, Pak Budi, for the implementation of BRT in both cities. in these two provinces, the treatment towards the existing operator is different. So one of the takeaway, it is one of the takeaway. I think that's all for the panel discussion in this afternoon. Maybe we can continue to have the more in-depth conversation. Pak Bob already opened himself, and he is very welcome to further discussion. And if there is sharing initiated by PLN, and there are some issues about operators, for example, and how and who will take the burden of 100% electrification, it can be discussed further during the implementation. I think that's all for the panel discussion session. Thank you for all panelists. Thank you for your time, Pak Bob. And thank you for your willingness to be contacted. Pak Agustinus, Pak Budi, thank you very much for your inputs. We will continue to communicate until hopefully in 2023 or 2024, BRT in Medan, in Greater Medan and Greater Bandung have already been implemented with its electricity bus. Thank you, gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We will take note on your mobile. We will take note on your mobile phone. Pak Agustinus, Pak Budi, maybe we can talk further. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, Ibu Nupur, and also Janeta, and Sarah, and Mr. Refi. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ibu Nupur Gupta. I'd like to hand over it to Sarah. Thank you, Bafaila, and thank you for the panelists.
Please do join me, ladies and gentlemen, in welcoming Ms. Nupur, the Senior Urban Transport Specialist from the World Bank, to deliver her closing remarks for us today. To Ms. Nupur Gupta, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Assalamu alaikum to everyone, and a very big thank you to all our participants and our speakers who added a great deal of value to this entire workshop and really brought a lot of interesting ideas and collaboration to the fore. We started on a very high note with the encouraging opening remarks from Pa Suharto and Ben Ibergen from the World Bank. Both of them emphasized the importance of electric mobility for Indonesia and the need to move strategically towards reorienting the mobility solutions in Indonesian cities towards transit, so shifting people from personal modes to more sustainable green solutions such as public transport, and shifting the fuel towards electric vehicles away from the more polluting diesel and existing fossil fuels. We started with a very interesting discussion by Faila, highlighting the very large number of parameters that go into the decision-making process to finalize a roadmap for electric mobility deployment. And we're looking specifically at through the lens of the BRT projects that are planned under the Indonesian Mass Transit project supported by the World Bank and EFT. I think the message for cities, considering the deployment of electric buses, is that there is a huge interplay in terms of how the routes are configured, what the passenger loading and frequencies are, on starting with where your depot locations are, how many operators are planned to be deployed on this network. All of these have huge implications on the way that the size of the fleet is decided, the charging infrastructure and charging strategy is decided, the size of the battery is decided. So there's a number of aspects which need to be thought through very carefully, because as Revi Petrada very clearly showed us that all of these have a cost implication, right? And it's through this TCO analysis, the total cost of ownership, it's really thinking about the unit cost of using the vehicle and looking at it in a combined CapEx and OpEx construct to see what the overall costs, how the costs will change based on where you locate your depots, if they are far away, and the costs start going up with the dead mileage. If you have a large number of operators, if you have a route structure or service plan which tends to pull down more of the energy and requires a much higher charging requirement. So all of these have to be thought through, and this is what Sharda showed to us, that the final implementation plan in terms of deployment has to be thought through this lens in trying to optimize and get a very cost-effective but robust system on the ground with electric mobility. And finally, we had a very interesting panel discussion moderated by Faila Sufa, and the panelists have really given very thought-provoking contributions during the panel discussion. It's very encouraging to note, as Pa Bob highlighted from the PLN, that energy is not a constraint, that there is enough headroom both in Medan and Bandung to service the requirements for the e-mobility BRT projects in both these cities. So that is not a consideration. However, costs are high, and they are willing to collaborate to look at solutions which will help the cities reduce their costs. He also highlighted very importantly that the electric mobility costs of operations are almost 1/4 to 1/5 of what they are with the fossil fuel. So that's an important consideration to keep in mind. We also heard concerns about the cost implication of 100% electric mobility deployment from the transport agencies in the two cities, but also a very interesting suggestion on, can we look at clean fuel or renewable energy sources to support our mass transit projects in these cities. And finally, the discussion around how extending the contract duration of these O&M contracts can really help reduce the burden, the fiscal burden, and the deficits that are likely to be there if we try and straitjacket it into a 3-year contract, which is the current norm. So these are all very important things that need to be discussed further. And tomorrow we will regroup to get into to the policy, institutional, regulatory, the business and financial modeling aspects of moving forward on this electric mobility agenda in both Greater Bandung and Greater Medan. And hopefully there are a lot of lessons for all the other cities that are planning to embark on similar projects around Indonesia. Thank you so much for your wonderful participation. I especially want to thank ITDP and ICCT for their support in putting together this wonderful 2-day series workshop. And I also want to acknowledge the wonderful role that Sarah Wayne has performed throughout the workshop in moderating us and keeping us on time in delivering this workshop. Thank you so much. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih, Ms. Nupur Gupta. Thank you very much for the closing remarks. And yes, we also hope that tomorrow we'll be regrouping again and continue the wonderful and also fruitful discussion. Thank you, Ms. Nupur Gupta. And ladies and gentlemen, with the closing remarks, we have end of the first day of the e-mobility adoption roadmap for Greater Bandung and Greater Medan Bus Rapid Transit Systems Workshop. We would like to also that tomorrow we'll be continuing the second day of the workshop with a second session and also fascinating topics that will be discussed. And we'd like to also kindly inform you that we will be starting at the same time as we did today, which is 9 a.m. Western Indian RGMT, and please do join us for the workshop and discussion tomorrow. I, Sarah Wayne, thank you for your attendance and participation, and we are looking forward in welcoming you again tomorrow. Thank you and goodbye. Terima kasih.